Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Gittin. This is our last class of Masechet Gittin. It is our 13th class, and today we are going to be reviewing the last few dafim, the last few pages of Masechet Gittin, daf 86 through 90. It is fascinating. We could talk about it maybe a little bit at the end. And I think in many the ends of the Masechet, we usually get a lot of the fundamental concepts. So I would say in regular books, when we read them, you would start with an introduction and some fundamental concepts and then go to more complicated things. Generally in the Gemara, that is not always the case. It is not always linear. And when we get to the end of the Masechet, we get a lot of the, I would say, fundamentals that we have seen before, but this is the source. So Daf 86 begins with a Mishnah that tells us that there are three types of gets that are invalid, but if a woman used that get and then, or that was the get she received when she got divorced, and then she got remarried, her children are not mamzerim, meaning they're not seen as illegitimate, even though the get itself is in I would say, according to the letter of the law, is invalid. So the first one is a get that the husband wrote, but no witnesses signed it. If you remember in the beginning of the Masechet, we spoke a lot about witnesses signing the get. So if you have a get that the husband wrote, but there were no witnesses, again, this is invalid. However, if she gets remarried, her children are not mamzerim. The second one is that there are witnesses, but there's no date. If you remember last week, we spoke a lot about making sure that the date is accurate. And the third one is that there's a date, but there's only one witness instead of two witnesses. So we can understand how something is missing, but not enough to basically ruin the lives of the children. And then the Mishnah finishes by saying, if there are no witnesses on the get, but it was given in front of witnesses, so then that's valid. That's completely valid, even though, again, that's not the proper way to do it, but that is actually completely valid. And she can even collect, her ktuva from property, so that does work. If you remember, we had a machloket whether which set of witnesses were the most important, the ones that signed on the document or the ones that witnessed the husband giving it to the wife. And that's part of this Mishnah. The Gemara explains that an old get, meaning that, again, the date is not accurate, she would not need to leave the second husband. And then there's another get. There's something called a get mekushar. It's folded and sewn. And what happens is, and we'll see this in a minute, but basically, for a Kohen, a priest, if the Kohen gets divorced, he cannot remarry the same woman because now she is a divorcee, and a Kohen is not allowed to marry a divorcee. So when the Kohen wants to get divorced, we want to make sure that he's really sure about doing this. So they do what's called this get mikushar, where they write and then they fold. I've heard two different explanations. One is where they would, let's say, write a line, fold it, sew it, or fold it, and then witnesses would sign on that fold, and then again, write a little bit more, fold, sign, and they would repeat that. They would repeat it 3 to 7 times. I think we talked about this last week as well. And that is a way to kind of, I would say, postpone the process to make sure that this is something the husband really wants to do. Now, another way I was explained was, again, my friend Shuli Mishkin, who's the tour guide who writes the articles on Hadran. She said they actually found these documents, I think in the Dead Sea Scrolls, if I'm not mistaken, in the Dead Sea, finds. I think that's where she said they found them, where it was actually a sale document, but basically they would write the sale document on the top of the page, then they would write it again on the bottom. They would fold up the bottom part so you could still see the top, and then they would make like stitches along the edge, and each stitch was signed by another witness. So that's what they actually found. And again, so it's two ways to understand that. There's a concept, there's something called a bald get, a get kereach. That is a get that is missing one of these signatures. So that also, that was not mentioned in our Mishnah. And then the question is, does it make it a better get or less valid? Meaning, would it still, thank you, Zohar, in the Qumran caves. Thank you. Both the old get and the bald get were not mentioned in our Mishnah. The old get, she can actually, she can stay with the second husband. With the bald get, the get kireach, it's according to Rabbi Meir, the child is a mamzer, and she would have to leave that second marriage. Again, now here the Gemara says that, again, our Mishnah listed 3 cases where if that is the list, if that is the get that she used to get remarried, her children are not mamzerim, they're not seen as illegitimate. However, there's a machloket if she needs to leave that second husband, meaning, is she seen as really divorced from the first or not? And that is a machloket in the Gemara on Daf 86. Let's say a person brings a get from outside of Israel, and he didn't say, I saw it being written, right? This is like full circle. This is how we started the Masechet. So he didn't say, I saw it being signed and written. So now it's a machloket again. If she uses this get to get remarried, are the children mamzerim or not? How do we remedy the situation? We assume that he did see it getting signed. He just didn't say. So if he takes it back and then he says, I saw it being signed and I saw it being written and then signed, so then it is valid. We said in the Mishnah that if the husband wrote it and one witness signed it, this is valid. But let's say it was written by a scribe and then signed by one witness, so then that is invalid because the husband didn't write it. Or maybe it is valid in retrospect. B'di'eved, we say that it is valid. If the scribe and another person signed it, so then that is completely valid. Even lechatchila, a priori, it is valid. That is seen as 2 witnesses. As we said, let's say she has children from the new marriage. She doesn't. So as I mentioned, there's a machloket if she needs to leave the husband. So the Gemara says if she has children from the second husband, so then she doesn't need to leave the husband. But if there are no children, so then she does need to leave, right? Again, the idea is that if she would have to leave while she still had the children, one would assume that the children are mamzerim, and that would be a problem for the lineage of the children. Okay. Here the Gemara talks about other cases where one got married under, I don't want to use the word false pretenses, but under a certain assumption that they could get married, but it turns out that they couldn't. And then what are the ramifications? So the Gemara goes back to Yivamot, if you remember, if there's, for some reason, if the wife cannot do yibum for whatever reason, in terms of she's somehow related to the yavam, so then her co-wife also does not need to do yibum, meaning they're both exempt from doing yibum. But then, let's say that it turns out that she did need to do yibum, right? But in the meantime, she got remarried. What happens? So the Gemara talks about the co-wife needing to do chalitza instead of, right, she can't do yibum. As I mentioned, back to our original case, if the woman used one of these gets and then got remarried and has children, we said she has to leave the husband. If there are no children, she doesn't need to leave the husband, as we said. You don't actually, so then we talked about not having witnesses signed on the get. So the Gemara explains that you don't actually need the witnesses on documents if there were witnesses who watched you give the document over to the person, right? But as we said, that's a machloket. And really, no, according to the sages, you do need witnesses to sign on a document, and it's not enough to have the witnesses there. But the law is that really, if there were witnesses who watched the giving over of the get, it would be okay if there weren't witnesses who signed on the get. Okay, the next Mishnah on Daf 86 says that, let's say two people who had the same names sent two identical gets with the same agent, right? Right, Yaakov was divorcing Rachel, and another Yaakov is divorcing Rachel, and then the agent got mixed up which one was which. So then you give both gets to both wives, and then it is valid, right? They each received the get. One of them is theirs, the other one is not, and it is valid. Let's get a little bit more complicated. 5 couples written on the same get, and it has a listing of the couples, and then witnesses sign on the bottom. That is valid, and you give the same document to the 5 different women. Let's say they, I guess, they were trying to save on paper. So, one couple, the get was written, and then another get, another couple wrote their get, and another couple wrote their get, and then the adim sign at the bottom. Only the bottom get is valid, and not the ones above, because as you can imagine, there's no signature under each and every one. So now the Gemara explains, as we saw in the beginning of the Masechet, the writing of the get must be done, in Hebrew we say lishma, right? For this woman, it has to be with proper intent. But handing over doesn't need to have proper intent, and therefore you can give, right, the same document to 2 different women, even if you don't know which one is for which, as long as it was written for her, then it is valid. So now the Gemara discusses this 5 couples. How does that work? So let's say there was one date for all the couples. So then it's valid because it was all done on the same day. Let's say each couple has a date right after each one, right? There's a date for each one and they're different. That would be invalid. Or that, again, if let's say there's one date, it's also, maybe that would also be invalid, but if all the husbands write first that they're divorcing the 5 wives, right? So basically you combine it into one get. On the 5th day of Av, right? Yosef, Moshe, Aaron, right, are divorcing. Leah, Rachel, Sarah, right? It all becomes one get, but for 5 couples. So then that would be valid. Again, we do not do this nowadays, but it is interesting that that would be valid. Okay, then, okay, Daf 87 tells us that, again, let's say there were 5 couples. So the Gemara asks, maybe the witnesses only signed for the last couple, right? Again, if we just have a list of the couples, maybe the witnesses are only signing for the last couple. So the Gemara says, no, the fact that it says and, right? Yosef is divorcing Leah and Yaakov is divorcing Rachel, right? The fact that it says and, it joins them all together. And therefore, when the witnesses sign at the bottom, then the document would be valid. Now the Gemara asks, what about if there were 5 different dates? Then it would be invalid. The Gemara says, well, no, maybe even if they were all written on the same day, maybe it's also still invalid, meaning maybe you cannot combine all these different couples. So the Gemara says, right, let's say you have each couple. So then it seems that you have one get written for multiple women, and we know that you're not allowed to do that. So the Gemara says, no, the scribe wrote after each couple, right, after each couple separately. So each get is separate, and then it would be okay. Now, if you remember it's been a while since we started the Masechet, but we were going back and forth between a get for a woman to get divorced and the document, which is also called a get shichrur, that frees a slave. So the Gemara asks the same idea, right? 2 slaves, right? Can they be freed with one document? Or no, do you need 2 separate documents? Just like for 2 wives, you need 2 documents. So too, for 2 slaves, you need 2 documents. And the Gemara brings support for both of these ideas. And it seems that there's a source for both of them. The Gemara also says you can't have a space in between the couples that are listed. And there's a machloket if the date separates them or not, right? Do we say on the 5th of Av, right, Yosef is divorcing Rachel, and right on the 5th of Av, Yaakov is divorcing, I forgot all the names, but add in the names. Maybe that date separates the couples, and then that's okay. Maybe it's invalid, or maybe it's valid. There's a machloket in the Gemara. Okay, next Mishnah. So we're going to have a lot of Mishnayot. The next Mishnah, 2 gets written next to each other on the same paper. Again, it's important to understand that in the time of the Mishnah and in the time of the Gemara, there's a lot of poverty. So to be able to buy parchment is not simple. Again, we saw that the get does not have to be written on parchment, but let's say it was. So maybe they wanted, right? Oh, you're getting divorced. Oh, I'm also getting divorced. Let's, split the cost of the paper. So let's say it was written on the same paper. And now you have 2 Jews. Okay, so you have to imagine, I should have found a picture of this. But basically, you have 2 columns, right? A right and a left. Now, right, there's a get on the right and a get on the left. We know that Hebrew goes from right to left. So the Mishnah tells us 2 Jews sign in Hebrew, and they start from the right column, right? The signature goes across the whole bottom of the page. So they start on the right column and they end under the left column. Now, if you think about how we sign our names, so you would sign your name, right? Yaakov ben Yitzchak, right? The son, the person, the son of, and you write his father's name. So if you think about these columns, you would have the witness's name under the right column, and then you'd only have the father's name under the left column. Right now, don't forget, each get needs to be signed by a witness. So now, keep that in mind. So two Jews sign in Hebrew from right to left, and now two other Jews, they're not non-Jews, they're Jews, but they sign their name in Greek. Now, Greek goes from left to right, and we're going to learn in a minute that the Greeks used to sign their name backwards, meaning father who gave birth to the son. And it's the son who's signing the name, right? So again, if the witness is Yaakov, in Hebrew he would write Yaakov, the son of Yitzchak, but in Greek, the name would be Yitzchak, who gave birth to Yaakov, right? Or who fathered Yaakov. So now again, if you're imagining the two columns, if you're signing it in Greek and starting on the left side, if you sign your father's name first, then the left get has all the fathers, right? And the right get has all the names, all the first names of all the witnesses. Therefore, the Mishnah tells us that the right get is valid because it has all the signatures, but the left column is invalid because it doesn't have any first names on it. So, right, again, because it goes from left to right. Okay, let's say, so that was, we have four witnesses, right? Two in Hebrew, two in English. Let's say they did it 1, 1, 1, 1, right? So, so the first person signed their name in Hebrew, the second in Greek, the third in Hebrew, the fourth in Greek. So now neither of them are valid because, again, the two first names are on the right side and the two first names might be on the left side, but the Gemara is going to explain the case. So let's go to the Gemara. So again, the Gemara asks, why isn't the left column valid? Again, as I mentioned, right, it only has the father's names under it. So the Gemara explains how people used to sign their names, right? So again, in Hebrew, as we said, it's your name with your father's name. In Greek, it was your father's name and then your name. But as we saw previously in the Gemara weeks ago, that people used to also sign their names with a symbol or a sign. So the Gemara says, maybe this person's name, this person's sign is the father's name, basically. And wouldn't that be valid? And the Gemara says, you wouldn't use your father's name as your name, right? That doesn't make sense. Like you'd use something that had to do with your name, not with your father's name. So again, the Gemara again says it's important to understand that the left column isn't invalid because the person signed in Greek. That would be okay to sign it in Greek. The issue is that, as we mentioned, the issue is that it was the father's name that's under that column and not the witness's name. Another issue is that maybe, again, remember we said the one with the 1, 1, 1, 1, none of them are valid. Maybe it's because they flipped the name and they really did put their first name under it, but we don't know. Or maybe they maybe they wrote their first name first and we don't know, therefore we say the whole thing is invalid. Another question is maybe there's a like a space in between and maybe that would also invalidate it. Okay, next Mishnah. Let's say half of, right, so we just did 2 gets. Let's say half the get is in one column and the other half of the get is on the other column, right? So it's now 1 get, but in 2 columns. And then again, the witness's sign on the bottom, that is valid. Let's say that the witness's sign on the top or on the side, that is invalid. You need to sign under the get document. Let's say you wrote one get at the bottom, and then you flip the page upside down, and then you wrote the other get on the bottom, right? So basically looking at it, you have two gets going, from the center to the end of the page, right? Again, just like flipped over. So let's say you did that. And then let's say the edim sign in the middle, that would be invalid because, the Gemara is going to explain it, but because where did the edim sign? At the beginning of each get, right? Because they wrote the get this way and then they wrote the get this way. So the edim aren't at the end of a get, they're at the beginning. So that doesn't work. Let's say the other way. Let's say you wrote it from the top down and then flipped the page over and from the top down, and then the edim signed in the middle. So now, whichever get has, right, the get and then the edim underneath it, that would be the valid one, right? Because one of them is upside down, right? This one goes this way, and then this one goes this way, and then edim sign presumably in one direction. So whichever one you could read straight and then have the get, the witnesses, that would be valid. The other side is not valid. Okay, let's say you wrote the get on the top, and then you left a space, you didn't flip the page over, and then you wrote the second get, and then again, the edim, right, they sign their names in the middle. So the top one is valid because, again, you have the get plus witnesses. The second one is invalid because there are no witnesses after that document. If either the get or the signatures or one of the signatures is in Greek and the other part is in Hebrew, that is valid, which is important from our last case, right? It's okay to have different language. Here it's Greek and Hebrew. It is okay to have both of those in the document, meaning one witness signing in the Hebrew and one in Greek. That's fine, as long as the names are under the get, under the document. Now the Gemara, the Mishnah explains that the witness can sign, right, their first name, right, Ruvain, Eid, right? He writes his name, Ruvain, Eid. That's valid. Or he can even write, I'm the son of Yaakov, right? Ben Yaakov, Eid, right? If he doesn't write his first name, but he writes, I'm the son of Yaakov, that is also valid. Sometimes they wrote the word Eid at the end, but sometimes they didn't. That's okay. And actually, if you listen, if you go to like a wedding when they sign the ketuvah, again, we were talking about get, but just in terms of ketuvah, they usually read out the witnesses' names at the bottom, and they usually say, right, Yaakov ben Yitzchak Eid, right? He is the witness. And then the next man, he is the witness, Eid. So you don't have to, but you could write it. Let's say they wrote only their nickname or their last name, which is interesting. The Gemara is going to talk about it. There's no such thing as a last name in the time of the Mishnah or the Gemara, right? Last names are very new. But here it says like a last name. So then that is valid, and the Gemara is going to explain it. So the Gemara tells us on Daf 88, again, the two columns, we said two gets in two columns. Wait a minute, maybe, it was one get written in two columns. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, maybe it was two separate gets, but you like cut the top off this one and you cut the bottom off of that one. The Gemara says, no, you have to make sure that it's not cut, that the spaces are even, and therefore it would be valid. Again, because you're not allowed to repurpose the get. Maybe the Gemara says maybe it's written like this because the husband changed his mind in the middle of writing it, and then he started in the second column, which would make it invalid. So the Gemara says no, he wrote like half a sentence on the bottom of the first column and continued it to the top of the second column, and then that shows that it was written all at the same time with the same intention. Or the Gemara also gives that possibility that that you could tell on the parchment, right? The Gemara talks about how the parchment was stretched, that there's like the density of the parchment is different from the middle to the edges, and you can see that the parchment is complete or whole or hasn't been cut up, and therefore it would be okay. It seems that the edges are darker, the middle is lighter. The Gemara, since we mentioned signs in terms of writing your name, instead of writing your name, you used a sign, right? Rav used to use the side, he used to use a sign, but we learned that that is actually invalid for, excuse me, that is invalid for the get. He has to sign his name. And what about writing perpendicular, right? Signing perpendicular to the writing. The Gemara says that is invalid. You cannot sign this, well, I guess it would be written this way. You can't sign this way. It must be signed, parallel to the document. And that would make it valid. We said that if the scribe and another witnesses signed it, that would be valid, and that works. And now the Gemara discusses this concept of a last name. The Gemara says, what's this last name? So the Gemara describes that sometimes families refer to themselves by a famous ancestor. And therefore, they would use that name as part of their like lineage. The Gemara says that it only works for 3 generations, or maybe even up to 10 generations. They could use that name as part of their own, as part of their name. And since we're talking about generations, the Gemara talks about that I guess here the idea is that there is hashpa'ah, there is influence from up to 3 generations. So as long as that person had an influence on the subsequent generations, that would be fine. But maybe it's longer. The Gemara talks about 7 generations that will commit idolatry and will lead to the destruction of the temple. And the Gemara goes through all those generations at the end of the Tanakh, where we see really the end till the destruction of the first temple. The Gemara describes Hoshea, who was one of the last kings who removed the blockade of the road to Jerusalem, and people then were able to go to Jerusalem, but this is from the northern tribes, but people still didn't go to Jerusalem, and the Gemara says that's why God exiled the 10 slaves, because even when they had the opportunity to go to Jerusalem, they didn't take it. And here the Gemara describes the exile of the craftsmen and the smiths, which is in the time of Yechoniah. It was earlier, 11 years before the destruction of the temple. And the Gemara explains that that was a mercy. Why was that good ultimately? Because when Tzidkiyahu, when the final exile went to Babel, went to Babylon, they actually had people there who had already established themselves. And because there were scholars already there, they were able to guide them and be a comfort for them. And the Gemara finishes by saying that God brought the exile back 2 years early in order to prevent complete annihilation, which sounds very similar to the Exodus from Egypt. Okay, the next Mishnah on Daf 88, a forced get. Right? We know that one is not allowed to force the husband to write the get. However, the Gemara says that if a Jewish court forces the get, and the Gemara is going to explain exactly what this means, it is valid. But if a non-Jewish court forces the get, it is invalid. What is the case here? The Mishnah explains we're talking about if Jewish law says that this husband and wife must be divorced. We went through this in Masechet Ktuvot, different cases where they must be divorced. So then the court can force him to divorce his wife, and it is valid. If there's no halachic, no Jewish legal reason to get divorced, a Jewish court cannot force the husband to give the get. Okay, if she goes to a non-Jewish court and forces him to get divorced, again, as I said, it is invalid, but it does have what's called the scent of a get, what's called reach haget, and therefore, even though she is not divorced, she is seen as quasi-divorced, enough to make her invalid to marry a Kohen afterwards, right? Let's say the husband dies in the meantime, she would be seen as not only a widow, but also a divorcee when we're dealing with a priest, a Kohen. Really, the rabbis in Bavel didn't have the authority to force the get, only the rabbis in Israel, because they had proper ordinations, smicha, but they could in Bavel force the get because they were agents of the Israeli courts, right? So it seems that they received agency from the Israeli courts that let them do it in Bavel as well. Okay, next Mishnah, we're going to talk about rumors. And this is very interesting in terms of how much validity do we give to rumors. And we'll see that this is not just a simple rumor, maybe it's much more serious. So the Mishnah tells us that if there's a rumor that a woman was betrothed, right, mekudeshet, we assume that she was betrothed. The Gemara will explain that this rumor is that there were two witnesses who went to court to validate the rumor, right? It's not just like, ooh, did you hear? Ooh, did you hear? I read it on social media. That's not what we're talking about. This was actually testified to in a court. But again, we don't have any proof. We don't, right? This is what the witnesses say. It is valid enough, and we see her as betrothed. Let's say there's a rumor that she's divorced. So if she's married to a Kohen, she has to leave her husband. As long, and now the Mishnah says, that is only the case as long as there isn't another viable explanation. This is called an amatla. Amatla is an Aramaic word, which means an explanation. I want to use the word excuse, but excuse sounds not real. This is real. If we can come up with another explanation, so then it's fine, right? Meaning, if there's a woman who falls in love with a married man and she starts a rumor that they're divorced, that is, right, we have an amatla, right? She has, right, what's the word? She has, not probable cause, or whatever the word is, right? She is connected to the situation. We do not, that's not a rumor we're going to listen to.
That's a conflict of interest.
Yes, conflict of interest. Thank you. Excellent. Conflict of interest. But another amatla would be if there was a condition to the get, if you remember, right? If you give me 200 zuz, then this is your get. So then you could say that she's divorced, but if she never gave the 200 zuz, she's not divorced. So those would be viable explanations why she, let's say, would still be living with him, or things like that, right? Or maybe he threw it at her. We don't know who it was closest to. We saw those cases as well. Okay, the Gemara explains on Daf 89, if the rumor was that she was betrothed and then divorced, right? Meaning like we missed the whole thing. She got betrothed and then she got divorced. We believe that. We don't listen to rumors that she had relations with a person, right? If someone says, oh, she was very loose, right? They definitely were together, right? What's called in the Gemara as znut, which is usually, right, licentious behavior. So we don't listen to those rumors. And we could say she can even marry a Kohen. We don't listen to those kind of rumors. The Gemara actually explains, and I think it's, again, like so beyond their times. I think that, nowadays with social media, people see pictures, people jump to conclusions, right? So the Gemara actually says, right, why would someone spread a rumor that so-and-so had relations with another person? Oh, they probably saw her flirting with him or acting inappropriately, and then they jump to conclusions. So we're not going to listen or believe these accusations, and we do not take them seriously. Again, we need very clear, accurate testimony, and then it is believed. Right? We don't listen to rumors that she isn't a virgin, or that she was married or engaged, if that she was a slave at one point. Right? We don't listen to those kinds of rumors. It also is important to understand, what does this mean, a rumor? It's not just that people are talking about it. It's that we have to have other substantiating evidence, right? So if, let's say, you say, did you hear so-and-so got engaged? And then you walk by the house and there are big balloons and there are people going in and out of the house. So then I'll believe it, right? But if you don't have all of those things together, then we do not believe it. The Gemara says, maybe it has to be that you heard the rumor today, that it's about today, right? She got engaged today, or maybe even up to 10 days, right? Did you hear last week so-and-so did this? That might still be possible. Another option is that the witnesses say that they heard from somebody else, right? You know how all good rumors start. My neighbor bumped into the mailman who saw the sister's brother's cousin, and this is what we heard, right? So if you can follow it back, then that's valid. Let's say you follow it all the way back to the source, but the source person now traveled, and we don't have any substantiating evidence. We do not listen to the rumor. Again, it's like crazy that this is, we're talking about this from 2,000 years ago, and right, life has not changed. But I wish it had, but it didn't. Right? If rumors, let's say the rumor turns out to be not true, do they nullify, right, whatever action that they took? So in Surah, they did, in the Hardea, they don't. And now there was a whole bunch of stories about women that had rumors that they were betrothed. And then they asked if we could nullify the rumor because they found out that it wasn't true. And depending where they lived, they would nullify whatever the consequence was or not. We said the concept of an amatla, again, an explanation, right? Even if it comes out 10 days after the rumor, it's valid, we accept it. Even if there are grounds for this amatla, for this explanation, we assume it's true and that the rumor is false, right? We give more validity to whatever explanation we can come up with, as opposed to the rumor. We said if rumors aren't established in the court, then we don't listen to them. Rumors, let's say after, so this is it's all important, but when we're talking about rumors, the Gemara says that rumors that come out after she's already married, we don't listen to them, right? So we don't listen to something. What if she's already married? Even after Erusin, but let's say she's single, then let's say there's a rumor that she was betrothed, then that is something that we would listen to. Okay, now it gets a little complicated. Let's say there's a rumor that a woman accepted kiddushin, right, betrothal. We'll learn all about that next week. She accepted kiddushin from Ruvain, and then, right, so there's a rumor that she accepted kiddushin from Ruvain, and then we saw that she accepted kiddushin from Shimon. Now, you can't do that. So what's going on? So she needs to leave Shimon, and then check out. We have to check out if she was really betrothed to Reuven. If you found out that the first kiddushin is real, so then she doesn't need a get from Shimon because they were never engaged. Again, I'm using the word engaged, but it's not. It's betrothed. It's kiddushin. Kiddushin is very serious. Again, we'll talk about it more next week. But if you do kiddushin, you actually need to get a divorce, right? You need to get a get in order to break off a kiddushin, and therefore, again, if the first one was valid, the second one is inconsequential because she was already betrothed to the first one. Therefore, she would not need a get from the second one, from Shimon. Okay, if you don't know, so then she should get divorced from Reuven first, and then she can marry Shimon. But she cannot do the opposite. And the Gemara says, let's say there's a rumor that she accepted from both of them now, from Reuven and from Shimon, right? We didn't see anything. It's all just rumor. So then she can marry whichever one she wants, because again, we don't take it at face value. And we say you can marry whoever you want to marry. Okay, last Mishnah on the last daf, daf 90. Beit Shammai says you shouldn't divorce your wife unless you find something extremely inappropriate, meaning if she commits adultery. If she commits adultery, then you divorce your wife, but otherwise you shouldn't divorce your wife. Beit Hillel say, even for a minor issue, you can divorce your wife. Let's say she keeps burning the food. So therefore, you can divorce her. Rabbi Akiva says, even, right, for a lesser infraction, right? Let's say he found somebody else that he loves more. He can divorce his wife. Fascinatingly, we have the rabbi's opinions on if you could get divorced on the last daf. So that is just fascinating. We'll talk more about it in a minute. So the Gemara explains, they're all using the same verse, right? It says that ki imtza, right? Ervat davar. Erva means like nakedness or impropriety. So that's why Beit Shammai says it has to be actually adultery, but it also has the word davar, right? A reason, a thing. Beit Hillel says anything, right? Something that bothers you. So again, the Gemara explains what these reasons are, right? Then the Gemara says, can he divorce her for no valid reason, right? I don't know, because it's Tuesday, I want to divorce my wife. Can he do that? We say that if he does it, we don't make him remarry her, right? It does work, but that is extremely, frowned upon. The Gemara explains that, like Beit Hillel says, a minor infraction, that is very subjective, right? If a fly falls into your drink, right? Some people really care and some people don't, right? It's compared to the wife, right? If let's say, and now it takes it to the other, like in another direction, right? If you see your wife speaking to another man, some men, right, men will have different reactions to that. One man might lock his wife in the house and say you can't talk to anybody. Another might say you can speak to your relatives, but not, single men or married men or strangers. Other men might let their wives go out immodestly, and the husband ignores it. And the Gemara says, like, you shouldn't lock your wife up. You also shouldn't let her go out immodestly and talk to whoever she wants, right? The Gemara seems to give values to each one of these things. The Gemara says, if she goes out immodestly and she's, being extremely inappropriate with other men, then it's actually a mitzvah to divorce his wife. He should get rid of her. If a husband sends away his wife for no valid reason, he is hated by God. Right? Again, this very powerful image of we don't take divorce lightly in Judaism. The Gemara says it's different between a first wife. You really shouldn't divorce her unless you really need to. With a second wife, it's easier to divorce her. And the Gemara says that if you divorce your first wife, the mizbeach, the altar in the temple, actually cries for you. And with that, we finish Masechet Gittin. I think that it's a very powerful Masechet. I would love to hear your thoughts. I wanted to share one thought. I read a fascinating article someone sent to me today by Rav David Beshefkin. He wrote an article about the Masechet Gittin, and he talks about the idea that, as we mentioned, it seems to be backwards or reversed, right? We start the Masechet by talking about a husband sending a get from overseas, and only at the end of the Masechet do we actually talk about reasons for divorce. And he talked about the concept of needing to heal from divorce, and that maybe this Masechet, the way it's formulated, gives the person the ability and the time to heal, and that it's we don't take in Judaism, we don't take divorce lightly. We take it very seriously. On the other hand, we do have a mechanism for divorce. We see that there are relationships that should not be, and therefore there is a mechanism. So someone once asked me, what do I think is Judaism's view on divorce? And I think that the end of the Masechet really sums it up, right? Meaning, if you're divorcing your first love, the mizbeach is going to cry. It's a very, very, terrible thing in the sense that it's very sad, and we would love for all relationships to last forever. But I think that Chazal, as I've mentioned many times, I think that the sages were very wise, and I think that they already, understood that there needs to be a mechanism by which these relationships that are maybe toxic, that are dangerous, that are really shouldn't be, these two people should not be together. There is a way for them to end the marriage. And as we mentioned previously, it's important to recognize that there needs to be a complete severance, right? We talked about that it's a get kritut. It needs to sever the relationship. There shouldn't be strings attached. There shouldn't be ways that that one spouse can manipulate the other throughout their lives. And I think that this Masechet, though very challenging at times, it's also important to, if you remember, in the middle of the Masechet, we had many stories about the destruction of the temple. If you remember, it was actually during the 3 weeks that we learned all these very, very terrible stories about the destruction of the temple and what brought it about. I think it's interesting that this Masechet not only talks about the breaking up of a relationship between a husband and wife, but there was also a breaking in the relationship between God and the Jewish people. And I think that they're interconnected. If you remember, we saw it at the end of Sota as well. We saw how when society deteriorates, it deteriorates on a personal level, but also on a national level. And I think that that is really something that we see in Masechet Gittin. I really hope that all of you are going to celebrate with your families or friends the end of this Masechet. It was a long Masechet, 90 daf. And I'm looking forward to continuing our learning next week with Masechet Kiddushin. Again, speaking of going backwards, we're finally going to learn how we actually begin the process of marriage and not end the process of marriage. I think it's a beautiful way to end Seder Nashim. This is the book of women, of Nashim. So that is next Masechet, is the last Masechet of Seder Nashim. And I'm looking forward to learning it with you next week. We will have an introduction and then we will do that week's Masechet. So wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.